Hello, all you patrons. Welcome once again to the pre-show.
Yes, indeed. Welcome, welcome. And I want to thank you, too, for dealing with this last day of summer, Labor Day. As you know, this is wonderful. They all look like they've come from a resort in 1920. You know, the ladies are in those wonderful summer dresses, and the guys are all in seersucker and white linen suits. I'll bet you folks, when the show is done today, you're going to have one of those mass bonfires of the straw hats that they used to do at resorts in the 20s at the end of the summer. I'll bet that's what they're going to do when we sign off.
You know what just hit me as you said it is this Monday's Labor Day.
Yeah.
I had no idea because every day is just like the other day.
No, 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 no. This Monday is Labor Day, which commemorates both the proud saga of the American workman and the birth of babies.
I don't think the last one, even though
Labor Day. Labor Day. You mean we're not celebrating mothers being in labor?
No,
Why
we
not?
celebrate mothers. Well, because that's a dual purpose that's too far apart, don't you think?
What? Mothers giving birth and workmen in factories and mines and so forth?
Yeah.
You think those two things are very separate?
Yes.
You sound like a man. I bet you've never had a baby, have you? No, you don't know what goes into it. You have no idea. That's just like a man. You're totally insensitive. All right, fine. We'll put aside we'll put aside our mothers and all that they went through just to put us here. We'll put all that aside, and instead we shall salute the spirit of the American working man,
There we go.
who in factories and farms and mines and railroads all across this great land of ours worked, toiled, and suffered for a better life for himself and his children and his descendants, i.e., us. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why we have Labor Day in September is so that we don't celebrate May Day.
By the way, another revelation, because I don't want to. I want to make all the women happy. I think literally every woman patron that we have has bought books from the bookstore. Like I'm pretty sure literally everyone.
That's because women work. I mean, women work. Women read.
That's true. They do.
They read more than men do.
They should be proud of that.
They should be.
Yeah.
Men don't read. They play video games.
It is a thing. It's a problem.
It's a big thing.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. You'd be amazed at how many good Catholic conservative type kids I've seen chatting away about games as though they were real things.
Right. Yeah, games and YouTube too. Because I remember Jordan Peterson was asked this question where he said, all your audience is primarily male. You're promoting chauvinism was the implication, and he said, well, the YouTube audience in general is overwhelmingly male. So just videos in general that's really sucked in men more than women.
Yeah, although I do say so that the vast majority of fathers are men as well. There's a lot of sexism around.
Thank goodness for that.
Biological sexism.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's in the interstices of power.
That's cis heteropatriarchy.
Cis heteropatriarchy. I've been accused of it myself.
Rightfully so.
All right. So, what do we got in the way of questions, if any?
All right. The first question's from Raphael. Question for Charles. How can we respond to people who try to use the UFO phenomenon to say basically every supernatural or preternatural event in and outside of the Bible was caused by advanced technology? I don't quite recall you answering this specific point in your talk with Bill Biersack, and it's left me thinking for a response, since it essentially seems like an alien in the gaps argument, if you get what I mean. Also, another question I have is, it seems the whole aliens coming in from outer space concept mainly originated in the very late 19th century and just grew as science fiction did in the 20th. Do you think science fiction served as the main catalyst for all of the UFO mania, which was unheard of in centuries past?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure it did. I'll answer the second question first. I'm absolutely sure it did. Um, I mean, and mind you, I say this as a science fiction fan, in case anyone's curious. I am. Uh, but the fact is that with the growth in technology starting in the last portion of the 20th century, the 19th century rather, which just expanded wildly, the science fiction genre grew up apace alongside it. And the idea of people on other worlds, although people had thought of it before, it really went into the mental bloodstream of the West in a big way. And I suspect, just as when we told stories, the earlier stories of elves and fairies and all that, you had fairy abductions instead of UFO abductions. But it's interesting to me that the effects undergone supposedly by the victims in both cases were very similar, which tells you one of two things, or possibly both. One, that there may be something real behind it. Two, that there is a certain commonality in human psychology, that these stories, if they're not based in reality, nevertheless, for whatever reason, are deeply a part of the human psyche. Uh, and of course, there's the possibility that both are true. I can't see both being false, though, simply because these are universal motifs. So, I don't know. As to the first, that's a very difficult question because it's very hard to prove a negative. No, alien technology had absolutely nothing to do with anything. Well, it's hard to prove that.
So you're not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens.
No, I'm not saying it was
Do
aliens
you know what I
because
just? Do you know?
I don't believe in alien technology in the sense in which his questioners do.
Okay.
In
I
other
just did
words,
the meme, by the way.
I'm sorry?
Do you know that meme of the picture with the guy with the crazy hair? I'm not saying
Oh,
it was
yeah.
aliens, but it was aliens. That's
Yeah,
from
yeah.
that show, I think, on the History Channel, Ancient Aliens.
Yeah. I'm not saying it was aliens. And see, this too is part of the problem with not reading books and getting everything from the internet. Books are important. Books are your friend. Books help you think. Anyway, yeah, I would say that the problem with the whole Eric von Däniken thing, hot rods of the gods, and that kind of stuff, uh, and the attempt to shove everything onto aliens. If you come up with a pet theory, you can make everything feed into it. So, for instance, if I hold that John F. Kennedy was really a sort of savior god who was sacrificed for his people, I could come up with all kinds of things to prove my point. And they'll be very difficult to disprove because how do you disprove them? You know, the can you prove that John F. Kennedy was not divine? I mean, and if hard pressed, you would simply redefine your terms.
This reminds me of a very good and important DVD called Expelled with Ben Stein, where
Yes.
he documents a lot of things. One of which is, the dominance of evolution in scientific areas, where if you promote intelligent design, you're blackballed, basically. You're laughed at.
Automatically blackballed.
Yeah. And but in sort of the climax of the DVD, there's he talks with a prominent atheist. I forgot who it was. And the atheist espoused the idea of aliens seeding life onto Earth. Like, that's how life started on Earth. It was seeded by aliens. Can you believe that? And it shows you that in the absence of religion, there is still something there. There is a belief in something.
And it is a religious belief, really. His aliens take the place in his head of God.
Yeah.
But see, then it begs the question, because even if that were true, where did they come from?
Exactly. It kicks the can down the road.
Yeah. If our ancestors were indeed aliens, where do they come from?
Well, we know your ancestors are aliens.
Only some. Others were elves. And as I've said, we had the DNA done, and we in my family are primarily human.
Primarily, yes.
Primarily. I mean, at least enough to cover the appearance for the most part.
All right. Anything else on this topic?
No, I think that's it, except to say that I can feel Halloween coming.
Yeah. We've got a bunch of these types of questions in the pre-show and full episode. Yeah.
Halloween's coming, kids. Start thinking about your jack-o'-lantern. Oh, and by the way, in case they ban trick-or-treating where you are, go ahead and get that jack-o'-lantern, carve it, put the candle in, as a way of saying to your owners.
I think you answered this already, but I'll ask it again. So you think there's going to be huge turnout for Halloween, right?
Well, I mean, in certain places, I don't think it's going to be everywhere, but I think that those places like Los Angeles, they got really exciting on the 4th of July, will get really exciting on Halloween.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't mean massive kid trick-or-treating. I mean adults in masks doing strange and peculiar things.
Wow. All right.
I don't know what those strange and peculiar things will be precisely, just as I couldn't have predicted the vast fireworks show on the 4th. But boy, I have rarely in my life been as proud of Los Angeles and environs as I was watching that over here in Austria. I felt very good about that.
Yep. Next question is from Oscar. We always tell Mr. Coulombe what to talk about, but we never ask him what he wants to talk about. What are your deepest thoughts, Mr. Coulombe? What keeps you up at night? What keeps you going? Please invite us into the world that is Charles A. Coulombe.
Ooh, you mean the screaming freak show inside my head?
Yeah.
Is that what he means?
I guess, yeah, the man who shot Cthulhu and
lived to tell the story. The Wizard of Trumau.
The Battle of Los Angeles and transgendered Winston Churchill.
Yes, that's right. Mom, there's a strange old man with a cigar and a dress. Well, as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff that bounces around in my head and very often makes me laugh. But, I think a lot about God and the faith. I think a lot about history, things I've done, places I've seen, books I've read, people I've known. I suppose you would say that there's a very heavy load of nostalgia in my head. Very much a romantic, I have to admit, in the sense of Washington Irving and Sir Walter Scott and Chateaubriand. I'm not ashamed, not in the slightest. And I like to look at the connections between things, the patterns in life, the underlying patterns in life, which appear often enough to please me. Yeah, I would say that by and large, my interior world's a pretty happy one, actually. Made up perhaps of equal parts of nostalgia for the past, hope for the future and contentment with what I've got. I mean, at the end of the day, I'll turn 60 this year, and the biggest single emotion I feel for those 60 years and the things I've done and seen, despite the annoyances and everything else, is gratitude. I'm very happy to God for the life He's given me, and for the chance to see and do what I've seen and done. Really, I hate to quote John Denver, of all people, but there's a song of his that pretty much sums up what's going on in my head, which is called Poems, Prayers, and Promises.
Okay.
Well, look up the lyrics. You'll find out why. So that's what's going on in my head.
Why do you hate quoting John Denver?
Well, it's kind of like whenever you've got to quote something that you just, on one level, you don't care for it, but on the other level, it's the only phrase you can use. So like consciousness raising. I hate it when people use that phrase, but it does have for me a very specific meaning. So for instance, for a lot of people, when the Smithsonian issued that thing on white culture, that was a consciousness raising moment. They realized that there was something wrong going on. And incidentally, apparently, this has had wider repercussions because the president has just ordered all government bodies to stop doing that kind of what do they call it? Systematic racism studies or whatever, training in anti-racism and all that. It's all to come to an end right now.
Great.
Well, I suspect wokeness overreached itself. See, the problem is accusing people of racism while the cities are burning. It just isn't smart. Accusing people of racism when we once again have a person of color running for vice president, and we had 2 disastrous terms of President Obama. I mean, the man is still not held responsible for what he did to this country. And that too, I think, is hovering around the edges. Notice people really don't think about President Obama at all anymore. But he was the one who got us on the road we've got with Russia. A lot of people think our problems with Russia went south because of Syria or Ukraine. That's not what did it. It was prior to all that. It was when President Obama slapped sanctions on Russia because of the anti-gay proselytization bill that Putin passed.
Well, listening to Putin in his 4-part interview with Oliver Stone, he clearly stated that it's funny how the United States is with its presidents, because no matter who is elected, they seem to have the same policy toward Russia. And he was kind of pissed off at that. Pardon my language, but yeah.
Well, with good reason, except that Bush Jr. did not. Under Bush Jr., we actually got along fairly well with them.
Well, he was specifically angry that we're placing all of our military bases along his border.
Yeah.
And he didn't want, and that forces his hand, because then he has to reciprocate and he has to match, and he doesn't want to do that.
Of course, absolutely. He doesn't have the means to do it, for one thing.
Yeah.
And what makes this new Cold War so stupid, and as I say, it was Mr. Obama who created it. What makes it so stupid is that there are only 2 places where we're really at odds. One is in the Near East. And if you look at it, we don't really have any real interests against one another in the Near East. Not really. Russia's main interest is to secure access to oil and to safeguard the Christian minorities of the Near East. Ours is, before anything else, the maintenance of the State of Israel, to some degree the protection of the Christian minorities of the Near East, and maintaining accessibility to oil. That's why we're both opposed to ISIS, you see. The whole thing is crazy. And then as far as Ukraine goes, Ukraine is a very particular situation. It's important to remember that when the Ukrainian SSR was created by Stalin, he tacked on the specifically Russian area called the Donbass, the Don Basin, to try to anchor Ukraine to Russia. And then Khrushchev did the same thing with Crimea. And that the idea was that Ukraine would never be able to secede from the Soviet Union, because if they did, they would lose Crimea and the Donbass. All right. Well, what happens? They secede, but the only way that Ukraine could keep those boundaries is if they had maintained scrupulous neutrality between Russia and the West. And this, of course, people forget. We had a short period of being allied with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And there was absolutely no reason why that couldn't go on. Absolutely none. But since it did, since it ended, there's a bit of a paradox. Either Ukraine stayed neutral, or if it didn't, the unfortunate truth was they would lose Crimea and the Donbass, which were placed there to keep them from leaving in the first place. But the other half of that, which is not pleasant for Russia, is that if they retain Crimea and the Donbass, they have to accept the fact that the rest of Ukraine will go Western. These are three unpleasant realities. The neutrality issue the Ukrainians don't like, nor the loss of the Donbass and Crimea. The West don't like that. And Putin won't like Ukraine, what's left of Ukraine, going with the West. But all of this was avoidable. None of this had to be, because Russia's main worry is not us, but China. As long as China has a huge population that needs an outlet, and Russia has an almost empty Siberia, there's a problem. And this is why Russia and the United States were tailor-made allies to act as a restraint on the Chinese. But that's been completely lost sight of. And of course, it wouldn't have been remembered by the Clintons, who were very much in the pocket of the Chinese. So, yeah, I know. It's a mean thing to say. Well, it's true. So that's where we are now. We've managed, our foreign policy has been so badly managed that Russia and China seem to be in sort of a rapprochement. But it's not a real one, because their interests are at cross purposes. China wants Siberia, Russia wants to hold on to it. There's no way around that. There was some big chunks of Siberia that were Chinese until Russia took them in the 19th century, including the great base of Vladivostok, which was Chinese. So, again, it would be nice if we had people at the helm who knew history and who knew something about foreign affairs. That would be good. But fortunately, we don't. And so we'll just slide along stupidly as we have.
Right. Next two questions are from Diego.
Hello, Diego.
While reading Vicars of Christ, A History of the Popes, I've noticed that a lot of heresies, particularly during the first 500 years of the Church, were originated due to incorrect interpretations of the divine revelations that took place during apostolic times. After the death of St. John, correct me if I'm wrong, there were no more divine truths to be revealed, despite the prophet in Salt Lake City would have us believe. And
What? He's attacking the prophet, peace be upon him? Okay.
and church teachings have basically confirmed this on different subjects that arose. Anyhow, the initial heretical proponents seemed to be misguided at first, and I would believe sincerely repent if they were taught with compassion the truth. For whatever reasons, the longer they believed their error, the nastier they would become in defending it. My question stems from a sincere approach to forgive souls, but how should one proceed in prayer, vocation, evangelization, education, etc., if falling into error can be a simple mistake? Is it sticking to church teaching or reading scripture or the sacraments or all of them?
Well, I think you've answered your own question, Diego. It's all three. I mean, that's the rule of faith is the teachings of the church, the scripture, and of course, reception of the sacraments and the grace that comes from them help to keep you on the straight and narrow. And the resolution in your own mind that what the church actually teaches is at any given moment true. The church teaches things because they're true. They're not true because the church teaches them. Gravity doesn't exist because scientists say so. It is what it is, and the scientists recognize it and go on about it. So too, the truths of the faith are true because knowledge of them was given to the church, but they're objectively true, objectively real, in the same way that having to pay taxes is objectively real.
Okay. What is Charles' opinion on the American higher educational system? Should one pursue such an endeavor? Is the reasoning as follows a sound one? To do as one's parents wish of them and receive an education.
Well, the question is it an education? And also, what does one intend to do with it? First, I'm still, I don't know if any of the audience read the woke list that I compiled for Crisis Magazine. But it was kind of a stomach-turning thing to go through because it revealed, especially in terms of our educational and cultural institutions, how culturally bankrupt, how intellectually bankrupt, how morally bankrupt our worthless institutions of higher education really are. There's this new thing at USC. This fellow was teaching Chinese, and apparently there's a word in Chinese for one that sounds very much like the N-word. He was fired for using it. Because he triggered some of the little darlings. See, how dare the Chinese have a word that sounds like that? Kill him! You see, these are the same little turdlets, if you'll pardon the expression, that are out toppling statues and playing Antifa. They should never have been sent to university. Never. Obviously, these were children that needed to learn a real job, a real trade, and go to work on a farm or a field or a factory, and thus be really able to celebrate Labor Day. They've obviously been educated beyond their mental means, except they haven't been educated, and that's the problem. One of the things that I'm all too aware of is that American primary and secondary education no longer teach anything either. And so you get a lot of mental zeros who go to these so-called places of higher education, and the quasi-Marxist or whatever the devil they are, moronic professors yap at them and create the children of the children of the corn that we're dealing with now. There's got to be a stop to it. Now, I don't mean to say that there aren't either actual colleges and maybe universities that are still turning out decent educations, difficult as it is given the lack of background most of their students have, or that there aren't, lonely academics even in places like Harvard and Yale who are still trying to teach despite the best efforts of the morons in charge. But I really believe that the vast majority of institutions of higher learning should be closed down for 4 years. And a new crop of professors put in, and students, in the meantime, trained up. And as for the children that are busy wreaking mayhem right now, if they want a cultural revolution, they should find out what it was like for the Red Guards in the 60s. After they tore things up and got Mao upset, Mao sent them out to work in the fields for years. That's what quieted the Cultural Revolution. So instead of burning statues and harassing teachers, the little darlings were out picking cotton. And that's hard work when all you know is ideological drivel. It's even hard work if you do know things other than ideological drivel.
Okay.
So to answer your question, if you want a higher education, go to a small school that actually offers one. And if your parents want you to do something that has prestige, go on the websites of the universities in question and drag up, the gender studies department, that kind of stuff, and let your parents see that and ask them if that's what they really want you to spend 4 years at their expense.
Right.
I'm afraid that as with the Catholic schools, a lot of these places have been trading on the reputation that their elders and betters built up for them over centuries and decades. But now it's a lie.
I remember in high school when we were trying to find a college, and one of my history teacher, he said there was a study that suggests that you have two people of identical qualities, and one goes to Harvard, another goes to, I don't know, perhaps a Cal State, that they would do the same. In other words, your ability to achieve success is not reliant on where you go to college.
Well, that's true to a degree. If you go to the Ivy League and if you mouth the right things, it does give you a step up in certain areas. It will give you a step up in journalism. It will give you a step up in politics. It will give you a step up in those kinds of things. In terms of the rest of shall we say the non-rulership roles, it won't do you any good. So in other words, if you want to be a high-profile lawyer or a high-profile economist or something like that,
Yeah,
you want to go to the Ivy League, because that is where the creatures that run the machine come from. But it's not as easy as it sounds. It's very difficult to get in if you're white, and if you're not white, you may be accepted on the basis of color and you may be allowed in, even though you're not really equipped for it, but you won't survive it. That's why the rate of failure of people of color who are allowed in to Harvard with, shall we say, less than the requirements given whites, a much larger percentage of them fail.
Yeah, I was watching a video. I'm really on a kick for Dr. Thomas Sowell, even though looking him up and at a glance he seems libertarian, which is a little too. Obviously, I'm not libertarian, but he says so many good things, and he was really angry about what you just mentioned.
There's reason to be, because it sets people up for a fall, and then of course they get resentful, and they figure that it's racism, because that's the narrative they hear. So obviously they were derailed by racism, and they're right, but not the way they think. The racism is what let them in without being qualified. That was the racism. They were not failed because they were black. They were admitted because they were black.
Yeah.
Without having the proper tools. And yet, all those proper tools have really, the standards have really declined in secondary education. And this is something I have to tell you that I come face to face with constantly these days, because of the various things I have to do. I'm teaching a class right now that's ostensibly American history, but it's really American history, literature, and civics.
Wait, you're teaching a class?
Yeah, I am teaching a class remotely, online, for a seminary.
Okay.
Well, what happened basically was that several of the lads got a hold of my American history, and the administration looked at it and thought this would be a great book to teach the history from. Unfortunately, the teachers that they initially wanted to use are not from the United States, and so they didn't really understand the material. So someone had the bright idea of trying to get the author to teach the textbook out of his, the author of the text to teach the class, which made sense. And so we struck the deal. I'm doing that one night a week for 80 minutes. And the thing is that, as with my classmates here, I've come to realize just how little secondary schools really teach. So I told them, I said, we're basically going to have to cram 12 years you didn't get into 9 months. And not just history, but, as I say, literature and civics.
Wow.
Wow, indeed. And you know my major weapon in getting them up to par on the literary aspect?
What?
You ready to giggle?
Yes.
Comic books. Not just any comic books. Classics Illustrated. Most of which are now available online.
Wow.
Well, I grew up on Classics Illustrated, and they gave me a great love of basically each comic book is a work of great literature turned into a comic book, sort of like Cliff Notes with pictures and better written. And the idea behind them, when they came out in the 40s and 50s and 60s, was that they would get kids to want to read the books themselves. And it's true. They did. I mean, for me anyway. And the funny thing is, I can say now, having read the books very often, that the comic book really was a good, faithful representation of it. I mean, it's better to read the book itself. But this, I mean, I don't have the time to teach all these books. So Classics Illustrated is a useful taste of what they've missed out on. I mean, one thing I learned too here is that kids aren't taught about poetry. I mean, they're taught poems, but they're this non-rhyming, belly aching about how terrible my life has been stuff. Feminist poetry, victim poetry. That's what they're taught. And there's no beauty to it and no interest and poetry by its very nature, if it's any good, stirs the heart. And none of them were taught any of this. In this very room here, I had 4 of my classmates enthralled when I read them my 3 favorite poems from when I was their age, when I was in college. And they were all, they'd never heard anything like it. They had no idea poetry could be like that. I mean, that's madness. What kind of an educational system turns people out that don't know poetry and feel no attraction to it, that completely ignores the world's great writers? What sort of an education is that? an education that teaches no history, an education that teaches no civics, that leaves them as ignorant as though they came in. I mean, they're functional. They can count. They can read, sort of. I say sort of. Because the other thing I've discovered is that the vocabulary has shrunk since I was in school. Words fail me. You have 2 or 3 generations of kids utterly betrayed by what passes for an educational establishment. And then that same educational establishment has the unmitigated gall, while our cities are burning, to bleat like sheep about, oh, it's dreadful, it's the systemic racism, oh my gosh. No, it's you. It's you, and you're dumbing everything down. That's who it is, you worthless morons. Now, I'll tell you something else I learned in doing this woke list. I learned that most of the subscribers to it are they're in the literary sphere are generalist sorts of things, like the medieval Academy, for instance, of America, or the Society for Victorian Studies, or for Early American Studies. What you don't get, for the most part, are societies that are dedicated to the work of one individual signing out with this stuff. I found that very interesting, and I looked. I couldn't find any. There may be some, but I couldn't find any. I looked. All the American literary societies dedicated to people from Charles Dickens to Charles Bukowski. No wokeness. And that, of course, I think is because unless the individual that you're interested in studying was proto-woked, pre-woked, if there's such a word, then, your man, Sir Walter Scott, wouldn't have gone for this kind of crap. Or Theodore Dreiser, or whoever it is your particular group is dedicated to studying. That's why I think the single interest societies didn't go for it. But the generalists sure did. And they, for the most part, are made up of academics who teach these topics in the morally bankrupt institutions to which I've referred. The treason of the Clarks.
Looking at your woke list, one thing jumped out to me, which is like you had like 50 or 60, because you do it alphabetically. So you had 50 or 60 A's, and then B, C, D, and the rest of the list was really quick. To me, it seemed like you started the list, and the A's were so long. Once you're done with that, it's like, oh, forget it. And this is too long. This list is too...
Actually, no, that's not true. It's just that most of them have names like the American Society for this, or the Association for that, or the Alliance of that. But it is true that I ran out of steam. And not because of the... it was not because of the alphabet.
Yeah.
It was because the sheer volume of moronic crap I had to read.
Well, that's the other. That's the other reason why I assume that, because I thought, wow, Charles went to all this crap. Yep. He went to every single one of these websites.
Yeah.
That's getting like punched in the face every time.
Yep, it was one of the most unpleasant 3 days I've ever spent compiling this garbage. And I ran across more like the Junior League of America, or the Alliance of Junior, whatever it is. They've got this. They've eaten it. They're eaten the woke hemlock. And again, you look at all this, and you can't help but say to yourself, really, when this passes, none of these organizations should get any support at all. They need to be replaced.
Well, to me, a more helpful list would be places that aren't woke and where, it's very functional, right? Like, it's like, oh, I need to buy, I don't know, let's say laundry detergent. Where do I get that from a place that isn't evil? Where do I get it from a place that isn't Amazon.com or somewhere else, right?
A list like that would be very good, but much more difficult to compile.
Yeah, yeah. But
And you would run the risk of exposing folk on the list to cancellation.
well, to me, I I feel like we should endeavor to promote these organizations, because otherwise
Oh,
everybody
I
sort of
agree.
drifts into apathy. Like, okay, well, Mordor offers free shipping, with Mordor Prime,
Hey,
and
I
Dark
like
Lord
that.
Jeff Bezos isn't so bad because he gives us decent prices. Everybody's
Decent
lulled
prices on
into
our
this.
manflesh. Well, I will discuss putting together an unwoke list. Although I don't think I'll call it the sanity list. Actually,
Because, I mean,
that's not as hard as it seems.
to be honest, I think that's what a huge chunk of Tumblr House business is. It's, we're not buying from Amazon.
I'll make you a deal with our patrons.
Okay.
If I'm not saying I'm doing it, but if I were compiling the sanity list, that is to say, organizations that either passively or actively have disassociated themselves from the cray-cray. If you know of such, send them in. And it could be anything from the National Association of Plumbers to Acme Gold Flower Inc.
And something to me more that's functional, like where you have a task, you're looking to buy something, you look at a list of topics, not alphabetically, but actually.
Hey,
No, I mean your list was fine. It was interesting, but I'm just saying, like, it needs to be actionable, right? It needs to be a resource. It's like, okay, I need to do this. Let me look at the list. Let me find. Oh, okay. Here's where I can get plumbing tools, or something
well,
like that.
and it could, of course. I mean, there's a lot of things like schools and universities. Um,
Yeah.
the Yeah, there are a lot of things that one could put on it.
I know where you can get coffee from. Mystic Monk Coffee. It's very
Uh,
popular. They
that's it.
actually, one of our patrons, I forgot who, but he donated Mystic Monk Coffee, and it was such good coffee. I was like, I was shocked. Um, and it
Yeah,
was
those
at.
were the Carmelites. A friend of mine, from Vienna here, has just kind of joined them.
That's great. Wait. What do you mean join them? Like take orders?
Yeah, he's become one. No, to become a Carmelite monk in Wyoming.
Oh wow,
He's left Vienna for Wyoming.
that's a interesting switch.
Well, he loves the Carmelite spirit, and it's the only place that he could use the Carmelite rite if he's ever ordained
Is it
constantly.
that's the center of that's like the epicenter of the Carmelite world, Wyoming?
Well, it's the only place in the Carmelite galaxy where the Carmelite rite is used exclusively.
I didn't know there's a Carmelite rite.
Now you know.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, it's not used by the Discalcid Carmelites, i.e., of St. Teresa's Reform, who adopted the Tridentine Mass to show their solidarity with Rome during the aftermath of the Reformation. So it's not used by the OCDs, but it is used by the old Carms. And this was kind of interesting because a priest whom you know said to me that he wanted to offer the Carmelite rite. And I said, "Oh, it's too bad for you, Father. You can't." So what do you mean? I said, "Well, you could offer the Tridentine, but I'm afraid you can't offer the Carmelite rite. You lot gave it up in the 1500s. You're OCD, Father. I'm so sorry for you." He said, "Why do you have that sort of weird sadistic tone in your voice when you're delivering bad news?" I said, "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Father. You seem very upset." One tries to help, and they never appreciate it.
I can just hear Father's voice as he says it and picture that.
Yeah,
Oh
well, he
man.
thought I was teasing him. Can you imagine?
Wow. Poor Father. Okay.
Poor me. He thought I was teasing him. Where is your sympathy for the falsely accused?
You have not proven your point that you're falsely accused.
I was helping.
You're helping by poking with a stick.
Well, sometimes. So, I think it was, what was it, Struwwelpeter, Straw-Headed Peter is a character in German folklore. But at any rate, they did a English language play based on the Struwwelpeter stories. And the narrator opens it up with, sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. Other times you have to be cruel for, shall we say, recreational purposes.
Well, it finally comes out.
What? I'm just quoting. I didn't say that. I didn't say I agree with it.
Oh, okay.
Do you agree with every quote you've ever made? I don't think so.
Well, that's true.
See?
Cannibalism,
Gotcha there, monkey.
cannibalism isn't nutritional democracy.
See?
All right.
Gotcha there. All right. What's the next question? Let's move on.
All right. Next question is from Jacqueline. Dear Charles and Vincent, a month ago, a group of doctors called America's Frontline Doctors held a day-long seminar on the value of prescribing hydroxychloroquine to combat the virus. Dr. Stella Emanuel, who was born in Cameroon and went to university in Nigeria, was immediately mocked in the media for some, to Western ears, strange ideas, such as the following from the Daily Beast. Quote, journalists quickly dug into Emmanuel's background and found that she's also claimed that having sex with demons can cause illnesses like cysts and endometriosis. End quote. Well, this does sound very strange. However, I'm pretty sure that I heard about the following book on an episode of Off the Menu. The book is, quote, Demoniality, or Incubi and Succubi. A treatise wherein is shown that there are in, quote, existence on earth rational creatures besides man, endowed like him with a body and a soul, that are born and die, end quote. This book describes interactions between these creatures and humans. It is not fiction. Charles, please comment on the reality or unreality in our century of incubi and succubi. Dr. Emmanuel has been written off as a total nutcase. What do you say?
Well, as with everything else of this sort, there's a whole lot of history behind it, which I would be unwilling to discard. Having said that, and I know Sinistrari very well, not him personally, I know his book very well. Having said that, however...
You just outed yourself as a vampire. Because he's 500 years old.
And... I said I didn't know him personally.
Right. Yeah, you covered up. Anyhow, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Firstly, everyone who thinks they've recognized me in old pictures or they knew me, every now and then some old guy will say, I know you. We used to drink together at Harry's bar in the 40s. This kind of... No. It's all nonsense. People have these weird memories, fake photographs. No. I was born the day Kennedy was elected in 1960. Despite what you've heard, the man I was introduced as my dad was not my grandson. None of that is true. It's not true.
Okay, that's your story and you're sticking to it.
Exactly. I mean, I remember the great the great alternative thinker, the Count of Saint Germain, who would always give the implication that he was 2,000 years old. And so a group of people asked his servant, is this true? He said, I have no idea, sir. I've only been with the Count 250 years myself.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah, so if you're gonna have a boss who's that kind of a con man, back him up. What?
Okay.
All
Anyhow,
right.
sorry for
Anyhow,
derailing you. Yeah.
no, it's all right. I don't care. I don't remember what the question was now, so that was useful.
Well, it's on demoniality.
Oh
And
yes, quite right. So as I say, I also have not studied it the way perhaps she has. There's a great deal of demon possession and that sort of thing in Africa. So I would not be surprised if they have a lot of stories that are cognate to the incubi and succubi of our culture. But if for whatever reason I came to such a belief and I was a member of the medical fraternity, I probably would not make that belief public.
sounds like a witch doctor shaman type
Well, it's exactly what it sounds like, and you'll
stuff.
notice that it's great when the New Agers do it. Everybody gets all excited. Oh, that's wonderful! I mean, look at the whole thing with what's his face, Don Juan. The Yaqui way of power and this kind of stuff. Oh, the academics really get excited about that. As long as it's any kind of voodoo that is anti-Christian, they're all for. It's only when it falls across their agenda that suddenly they begin talking about superstition and witch doctors.
Okay. I tried to read demoniality, or demoniat. Excuse me.
Demoniality.
Yeah. That's that's still too heavy reading for me. I
Did you
can't
read
do
the
it.
foreword? Did
I
you read the
did.
foreword
I
by
did.
Montague Summers?
I didn't enjoy it. I did not. I'm sorry.
It's all right. It was lighter than the rest of it.
It's tough reading. I don't recommend it.
You're a product of your time. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, am I though? I don't
Yeah, of
know.
course, we all are. We're a product of our time and place. I mean, listen, do you really think that if I hadn't been raised in the Hollywood of the 60s, I'd be the man I am now? And if, as against that, my heart wasn't always in the Hudson Valley and my blood in the St. Lawrence, would I be the same man I am now? Certainly not.
How am I a product of my time in this instance?
In this instance, because the whole tenor of reading material that you were given in high school was of a somewhat, shall we say, lighter variety than 70 years prior. I say 70 years prior because that's when Montague Summers did his translations. And mind you, with my classmates here, they find not just Cardinal Newman, they find C.S. Lewis tough reading. It's been a progressive, I can't say progressive, but it's been an ongoing decline.
I don't think that's fair to dismiss me in that manner. I've read St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila and a lot of pretty hard writings. Just because you're an old-timey writer doesn't mean you're great. I think there are a lot of bad writers.
No, but it does mean that if the translation is very, shall we say, accurate, it can be very, very tough reading, especially when it's from Latin, as Sinistrari was. Don't forget, Sinistrari's work was originally in Latin. It was Summers who translated it from Latin into English. And Summers himself had kind of an antique method of writing. Or to put this another way, you know how people often go after my prose for being a bit antique-y?
Okay.
He got the same thing in his day. And it was true. I mean, Summers was very, very fond of the older ways of writing, especially pre-18th century.
Your writing has changed dramatically over the course of your career.
Now, has it?
The way you write in Puritan's Empire and Vicars of Christ is very different from how you write in Star Spangled Crown.
Oh, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Because Star Spangled Crown was fiction and it was just out off my head.
No, well, articles too. Articles
How
too.
would you say it's changed?
I would say it's more dense and it's more kind of bird's nest like. You've got all these elements. Your sentences got longer. Uh, there's more complexity.
Well, I mean, I guess that's because I got older and I'm trying to cram more information into a shorter space.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the other thing. When you've got a whole book to write, you've got leisure. When you're writing articles or a short book like Star Spangled Crown, you've got to pack as much information as you can in as short a space as possible.
Hmm.
Whereas you can be a lot more leisurely when you're writing a book.
I see.
All right, let's move along.
Yeah. Okay. One last question for the pre-show. We're already over an
Okay.
hour long.
Oh,
Right.
heavens. Let's go.
From
These
Christian.
people have straw hats to burn. We can't waste their time.
Yeah. All right. From Christian. He says, "Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for answering my earlier question about General Lee. Doing a sweeping study of early American and Southern history, and I'm beginning to notice a cleave in Catholic scholarship on America. I've not yet read Puritan's Empire, but I plan on it. There's two viewpoints, it seems. One is Tory and pessimistic, where America is a Masonic Protestant nation not worthy of celebration, whose leaders were slave drivers and smugglers and treasonous against the rightful monarch of their land. The other is optimistic and sees in the Virginian founders specifically a well of natural virtue, boldness, and daring, and in the South, a social model based on chivalry, manorialism, and patriarchy. Jefferson was explicitly trying to preserve Anglo-Saxon natural law customs. The social model was taken over by urban capitalism in Britain, which necessitates the yeoman revolt in America. Both are true to some extent, but why do so many Catholics emphasize the continental European or Tory perspective and not find the virtues in Anglo-American civilization? Is it partly because American history has had her Yankee side overemphasized in modern times?
Well, like the earlier fellow who answered his own questions, this guy has done the same thing. I mean, basically, as he puts it, continental and Tory point of view is very much a corrective to what we've all been handed. And of course, the thing too, it's important to bear in mind, the whole English thing, whether it be urban industrial or agricultural manorial, was askew because of the religious problem, having gone Protestant. Now that expressed itself in different ways according to the type of Protestant it became, but it's still problematic. Yet there were some very good elements left, and had Catholics been serious, Catholic Americans, been serious about their faith, especially after emancipation in 1783, then, well, God brings good out of evil, and God would have brought good out of evil. The problem was we didn't have goodwill. So, as I say, both points of view that he elucidates are, as he rightly points out, they both have a lot of truth to them. I don't know about Thomas Jefferson being a great example of yeoman, but there's a certain amount of truth to that. But in a sense, it all gets lost in the horror of the great lost opportunity, which Catholics or Catholic Americans did not take advantage of, and in so doing, I have to say, betrayed their country.
That was a very astute question.
It's a very astute question, and one that, as I say, provided to a great degree its own answer. So this is obviously someone who's been thinking these things very thoroughly. I mean, again, I'll take the figure of George Washington as an example of what I mean. He is a very ambiguous figure in a lot of ways. Why do I say that? Well, firstly, he started the French and Indian Wars, and that wasn't a good thing. Secondly, however, he did manage to demonstrate a certain amount of skill as a militia leader during the French and Indian War, especially pulling his command out of Braddock's defeat. He was, having had a royal commission, he was certainly an arch traitor in the revolution, but he demonstrated his abilities as a commander, not just strictly military, but also in terms of his being able to hold his men together. And then as far as his political career went, he at the end of the war, he gave up his almost complete power because he could have taken over. He had the ability to take over the country if he wished to. And he stepped down and retired to his farm. And King George III, no less, said, when he heard the news, he said, well, if this is true, then General Washington is the greatest figure of this age. And then as president, he certainly did a lot to consolidate the Constitution. But he also presided over the Whiskey Rebellion, which was the suppression of one of our early quote unquote freedom attempts. And then, he died at Mount Vernon and may or may not have converted to Catholicism at the end. So we have a figure who's supremely ambiguous. A lot of good, a lot of bad, all mixed together. And that's true of the country as a whole, as it is of each of us.
Do you think America would be better off if George Washington didn't step down and he ruled over the United States as a monarch?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's no way to tell because, his line failed. He didn't have any of his own children. He had stepchildren, and he had nephews and nieces. He was certainly aware that he was not a legitimate monarch, and I think he probably had too much belief in the system, oddly enough, to want it for himself. Would we be better under the House of Washington? I don't know. I have no way of knowing. We probably would not have had the Civil War, at least not in the way that we had it. But it's hard to say. It's I love playing what ifs with history as much as anyone, but that's a real wild card. I mean, another question is what would have happened if Bonnie Prince Charlie had accepted Congress's offer of the Crown of America? That would have completely turned the war around. Suddenly, from being rebels fighting the rightful king, there would have been uber loyalists fighting the Elector of Hanover and his minions, and this would have had repercussions in the British Isles. It would have completely changed the character of the war. Now, how it would have changed it, I don't know, and what America would have been like under the by then very enfeebled Bonnie Prince Charlie, I don't know. And of course, when he died, to be succeeded by his brother Cardinal York, would the good cardinal have come over from Rome to reign as king over these United States? I don't know.
This is fun.
Yeah, what ifs are great. I mean, there are it's a whole genre of literature on these sorts of what ifs. What if Bonnie Prince Charlie in 1745, 46, 45 had managed to get his way, and the Jacobites had pushed through to London, and his father was put back on the throne.
You're a big fan. You're a bigger fan of what ifs than I am because you watched The Man in the High Castle.
I did,
which is like a huge negative what if.
Oh, that's not a what if I would have enjoyed. Although seeing how things are now, I don't know if there'd be that much difference. Seeing the Man in the High Castle in the wake of what we're going through at the moment, you begin to wonder, Really, was there that much of a difference? Plus, and here's another big plus, another great what if. What if Franz Ferdinand had not been assassinated, but had gone on to be emperor after Franz Joseph had died?
That's a tough one because it seems like everyone was just itching for a war. I mean, if it wasn't, it seems almost inevitable based on nationalism, and no one had seen the horrors of war in so long.
It seems that way, except for one thing. Franz Ferdinand was dead set against war. He was absolutely, I mean, he was one of the few major voices in Europe at the time. Like Stolypin, who had been, of course, assassinated the year before, the Russian. But Franz Ferdinand was one of the very few voices dead set against war. And worse than that, he wanted to federalize the empire and end the national problems within the empire. And he wanted to change the empire's system of alliances. What would an Austria allied with Russia and Britain have meant for Europe as a whole? It would have been a game changer.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and you know, I discovered his English advances purely by accident, because I discovered that he had, there's a parish in Buckinghamshire in England, a Catholic parish, whose great claim to fame is that Franz Ferdinand and Sophie went to Mass there several Sundays when they were at a hunting party at the nearby home of a local nobleman. And I thought, what? So I looked that up, and sure enough, he was there. And while he was there, all the leaders of the Tory party were on that same hunting party. Now, the Tories were out of power at that point, and of course, Franz Ferdinand was not yet emperor. But putting two and two together, and knowing how he felt about Russia, I would not be in the slightest bit surprised, especially because he did tend to conduct his own foreign policy. I would not be surprised if he made overtures toward the Tory leadership. And if, you know, if presuming Franz Joseph would die in 1916 anyway, 2 years later, Franz Ferdinand comes to the throne, and he eases out from the alliance with Germany and allies with Russia and Britain. With a Tory Britain, no less. Total change, total game changer.
Wow. It's nice to dream.
It is. Unfortunately, or not, we have the world we have. And so, the one thing, as C.S. Lewis tells us in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we are never given to know what would have happened. And I think it's, just as well. We have the world we have. A lot of it's annoying and a lot of it's wonderful, as it is for every generation.
Okay. It's been quite a pre-show. Hour and 15 minutes.
Oy.
Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We have much, much more. Stay tuned for the full episode coming at you.
And when it's over, you'll get to throw your straw hats on the bonfire there at that wonderful resort you people are staying at. God bless.